Okay, let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is load up our brush with water, and I'm going to wet this entire space on my paper. And don't be afraid if you're using too much water. You don't want puddles, but if you do end up with puddles, it's super easy to fix because you can just take your paper towel and just dab, 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 okay? But something that I've learned from teaching lots of people different watercolor projects is that beginners especially tend to not use enough water. It's really interesting. Adults don't use enough water, but kids use tons of water. Isn't that funny? But so yeah, don't feel like you're using too much water. Okay, it's better to err on the side of too much water than not enough, in my opinion, especially for this project, because you want that flowy, pretty kind of feel, and that really helps when you're using a wet on wet technique, which is what this is. Okay, so we're using wet paper, and then our paint is obviously wet, so it's a wet on wet technique. I love it. It's one of my favorite things. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to start with my lightest color, which is my pink, and then we're going to move on to the blue, and then the deep grayish black. Okay, so I'm going to take my pink. Okay, this is my opera pink. I'm taking a little bit on my brush, and then I'm making a little puddle. I like to squeeze my paint into these little spaces, and then I let it dry, and then I use it that way. I love using it that way. Okay, so I have my little puddle of pink. Get a little bit more water. All right, so now all I'm going to do is basically just kind of pick where I'm going to put my pink. So I'm just going to kind of layer it in this way. I like to go often in a diagonal type of angle. Pink, pink, pink. Okay. So now I'm going to go to my Prussian blue, which is right here. So I'm going to load up my brush and then make a puddle and add a little bit more water. And load up my brush and make a puddle. Okay, isn't that pretty? It's pretty just watching it in the palette. So what I like to do now with my blue is I'll kind of go alongside my pink. So I kind of go parallel with the pink and just kind of drop in that color. You can go around it. If it starts to mix and it's making a purple, that is totally fine. The more these colors mix and mingle, the neater they will turn out to be. Okay. If you're worried about, oh, there's still white, that's okay. This is only the first layer. We will have plenty of color on here by the time we're done. That is something that is really cool about watercolor, is you work in layers. So this is a great first project for people that are wanting to practice using layers in their watercolor. I love this color. It is so pretty. Okay. All right. Okay, I think that's good for now. And I have some white, that's okay, because I'm going to be adding some of my Payne's gray to those areas. Okay, so here's my Payne's gray. As you can see, it looks totally black in the palette here, doesn't it? But if you really stretch it out, see how kind of bluish it looks? But when it's all together, it looks like this deep deep blackish gray. It's so cool. All right, so I like to put my darkest color along my corners a lot of times, along the sides. I like to do that because I feel like it kind of makes like a vignette, kind of frames in the rest of the colors in your sky. All right, I'm going to drop in the areas that I saved. As you can see, I'm just dabbing it in. And there's making nice soft spots because we added plenty of water to our paper ahead of time. That's why it's so important to make sure you have plenty of water on your paper. Just adding in wherever I feel like it needs it. You know, there's no formula for this, for sure, which is kind of, I think, the most fun thing about it. Okay. All right, so I think that's good for our first layer for color. So one of the cool things about Galaxies, in my opinion, is sometimes there's like there's some streaks of like light areas. So I'm going to add some of those light areas, and the way I'm going to do that is I cleaned off my brush really good. I dried off my brush really well, and that's really important because these bigger brushes really hold a lot of water. So make sure you've really dried it off. And so what I'm going to do is with my dry, clean brush, or dryish clean brush, I'm going to pick out some areas that I want to keep lighter, okay? And I can just take out that paint. See, isn't that cool? Dry it off. Let's see, I want to add one, maybe right here. All right, cool. All right, so this is our first layer, okay? We are done with the first layer, so the only thing left to do for this is to let it dry, okay? So you can do a couple things. You can just be patient and let it dry completely, or if you're impatient like I am, you can either take a hair dryer or I have a heat gun and dry it, okay? So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm gonna do that fast forward so you don't have to watch the drying process, and then we'll move on to our next step. Okay, so my paper is totally dry, and I know it's totally dry partly because I can feel it's dry, and it also has flattened back out. Usually when it's still wet, it'll kind of have this dome look. So when it's flattened back out, it is totally dry. Okay, so something you may have noticed is as it dried, it seems like the colors faded a little bit, and that's true, that happens, okay? So that is something that you can count on in watercolor, is that the colors, will fade as they dry a little bit. So that's okay. That just means we need to add more color, more layers, okay? So basically, we're doing the same thing for this second layer, okay? But we're doing it a tiny bit different, okay? So what we're going to do, instead of wetting the whole paper like we did in our first step, I'm just going to be wetting each section as I go, okay? And by section, I mean color. So I'm going to start with my pinks. I'm going to add more pink to those areas, okay? So I'm going to wet my brush, dab it off a little bit, and I'm just going to add some water. So we're still using a wet on wet technique, but I'm not wetting the entire paper. Because at this point we need to be a little bit delicate because the paint otherwise will kind of get scrubbed up, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so I've wetted all my pink areas, and now I'm just going to go back in with some of my pink and just dab, dab, dab it in. And that's the same color pink. Is that crazy or what? When you start layering like that, when you have one color, the more you layer it, the deeper it gets. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to go in and wet my blue areas. I always start with my lightest color and go in order to my darkest. All right, so there's a blue area, another blue area. And as you are starting your second layer, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, I don't like this. I don't think it's turning out the way I had in my head. And I promise, it will turn out cool. Probably not what you had in your mind, because things rarely work out that way, right? But I promise it will be cool. All right, so I'm going to put in some of my blue. Oh my gosh, that's so pretty. I love that blue so much. I use this Prussian blue a lot when I am doing like water or seas or oceans or clouds sometimes. It's a great blue. Okay, and some of those lighter areas, remember we added, I'm trying to keep those, I'm trying to preserve those. But you know what, if you get in there, it's really no big deal. Sometimes you just have to let the painting do its own thing. Give up a little bit of control. You can do that, right? That's one thing that watercolor does, is it forces you to kind of give up a little bit of control, which I know for a lot of us is really hard. Okay, so now, and I have a puddle here. I'm gonna kind of take that. If you get too much paint somewhere, it's okay. Just take your nice clean brush and just pull it up. Okay, so now I'm gonna go into my darkest areas. We're gonna add some more of that Payne's gray. I'm just gently dabbing. If I really scrubbed and used a lot of pressure, it would take up my paint, and I don't want that to happen. You do have to be a little delicate. Okay, so I'm gonna add the black there, and then we'll keep going with the other ones, or the Payne's gray rather. All right, here's my gray. So pretty. And some of that pink mixed with the blue, and it made a really cool purple. So if that's happening for you, that is absolutely fine. These are so soothing to do. All right, so I'm going to go into some more of my dark areas. Here, you know what? Let's add a little bit of water. Oops. Forgot that was my white area. There we go. All right. Add more gray. Okay. This one's looking really cool. They all look different. So pretty. Okay, So I think I'm happy with that. I think I'm just going to leave it. Okay. So I will say, so here where I left my white area, lighter area, there seems to be kind of a line. If you like the look of it, that's a-okay. But if you really want to smooth things out, what I do is I take my clean brush, I dab it off, making sure it's fairly dry, and then I just take my brush and I just kind of wiggle, 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 and blur that line a little bit. See how that smoothed it out a little bit? That's always something to think about. Okay, so this is a second layer. I need to let it dry. Okay, so I'm going to do that real quick. Okay, so at this point, if you wanted to do a third layer of color to kind of build up some of the brighter or darker areas or whatever, you totally could. I'm happy with the way this looks after 2 layers, so I'm just going to leave it because I'm really excited to start our next step, which is adding the stars. Okay, so we're going to add the stars. I'm so excited.